Attending parties as a teenager is a rite of passage. Some might be quite quiet and go off without a hitch, others may involve alcohol, and some become out of control. Tragedies have occurred at these kinds of parties over the years, but maybe none quite as mysterious as the case we'll be discussing today. Join me and Alexis from the Great Unsolved podcast as we uncover the suspicious death of Kurt Sova. Hello and welcome to the 39th episode of Uncover True Crime Podcast. My name is Stephanie, and each week we uncover a different unsolved true crime case, ranging from unsolved murders, missing persons, Jane and John Does, and suspicious deaths. You can listen to the podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, and other podcast streaming apps, as well as on YouTube by searching Uncover True Crime. You can follow the podcast on Twitter at uncover_pod, on Instagram at Uncover True Crime Pod, or you can join the Uncover True Crime discussion group on Facebook. As you probably heard from an introduction, today is a collaboration with the Great Unsolved podcast. So, hello Alexis.
Hi.
How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm great, thank you. Before we get into today's case, do you want to introduce yourself and the podcast and what sort of cases you cover?
Sure. So my name's Alexis, like she told you. I do the Great Unsolved podcast. We are at about 85 episodes or something along those lines right now. And I also only do unsolved cases such as missing persons, murders, and John and Jane Doe cases.
So I'll be over on the Great Unsolved podcast at some point covering another case, and I will let you guys know when that goes live. But without any further ado, let's uncover the suspicious death of Kurt Sova.
Kurt Sova was born on the 15th of July, 1964, and was one of 5 boys. His mother, Dorothy, and father, Ken, certainly had their hands full with such a big family, but their sons looked after each other, with Kurt receiving most of the attention as he was the youngest. Kurt and his 4 brothers shared one bedroom in their apartment in Newburgh Heights, which was a suburb of Cleveland, Ohio. His brother Kevin wrote an article for CrimeCon where he spoke very highly of his younger brother, saying, quote, "Kurt was our little comedian. We'd call him Mouse when he was little because he would make a squeaking sound that made people laugh. His mannerisms were funny, and he loved to tease and push people's buttons just to get a chuckle out of them. He loved to make people happy. He had this incredible sense of humor, and we'd seen enough crying and pain. So when we'd get together, we'd all just laugh at him." Kurt's main pastime was fishing, and wasn't one for getting into trouble. He smoked weed every now and then, but he didn't really drink, which is why the events surrounding his disappearance and death have all his family and friends baffled.
On Friday, the 23rd of October 1981, 17-year-old Kurt Sova persuaded a passerby to buy him a bottle of Everclear from a liquor store close to his home. For anyone that doesn't know, Everclear is one of the most potent alcohols you can buy, although it is illegal in several states. He then went to his girlfriend's house for a while, then attended a Halloween party at a complex on Harvard Avenue with his friend Samuel. Kurt was drinking the Everclear at the party and became very drunk and had been sick, so his friend decided to take him outside to get some fresh air. They stood outside for a few minutes before Samuel went back in to get Kurt's jacket, but when he came back out a few minutes later, Kurt was gone. When he did not arrive home on the Saturday, his family started calling his friends to find out where Kurt was, and became very worried when his best friends Johnny and Danny told them that they didn't know where he was either. His friends tried to report him as a missing person, but the police department refused to take a report and told them to call back on Monday if he still hadn't returned home. Unsatisfied, his mum and dad continued to search for him and found out about the party that Kurt had attended. Dorothy Sova went round to the apartment, and Debbie Sams, the owner of the apartment, denied that there had ever been a party at her home and claimed to have never seen Kurt before. Dorothy knew this wasn't the case, and her instincts were right, as a pizza delivery man confirmed that he had indeed delivered a pizza to the home and there had been a party there that night. Debbie later admitted that she had held a party that night and that Kurt had been in attendance. Dorothy went back to the police with all the information she had gathered, but was told by Police Chief James Luca not to visit the home or talk to Debbie again, or they would be charged with harassment. The Sovas agreed but continued to search for Kurt, and over 50 volunteers were involved. They printed missing persons posters, searched the local area and tried to drum up as much attention to Kurt's case as they could. On the 28th of October, Debbie Sams called the Sovas claiming that there was someone sleeping in her basement who she thought might be Kurt. Both of Kurt's parents rushed over to the apartment, and this is Ken Sova's account of what happened next. Quote, "I went down to the basement. I thought maybe he was sick or he was hurt, and I figured if I got down there and found him that maybe I could do something for him. There, I found a cot that looked like someone had slept in it. After searching the whole basement, I didn't find anyone in there. I had no idea if it was Kurt or not. All I know is someone did sleep in that cot that night, and when I got there, they were gone." Unquote. That same day, 5 days after he was last seen, the search for Kurt Sova came to a devastating end when his body was found. On the 28th of October, Kurt's body was found near a ravine just 500 yards away from the apartment he went missing from. The Sova family were devastated, with his mother telling the media, quote, "The fellow that Kurt went to the party with told me that Kurt had become ill. They took him outside to get some air, and because it was a chilly night, he said he went upstairs to get Kurt's jacket and left him hanging on the fence. He said he went up to get his jacket and came back down and Kurt was gone. That's when I think I became hysterical. I thought, my God, something happened to him at that party, or in between the party and home. Only I didn't in my wildest dreams expect him to turn up dead." Unquote. Although they were heartbroken, they were also confused because his father Ken had searched that area 2 days earlier and is adamant that he would have seen Kurt if he had been there. Quote, "I know he wasn't there the day I went searching. They must have dumped him off that evening. I looked around and I'm sure that if Kurt was down there, I would have noticed that bright yellow t-shirt he had on against any terrain." Unquote. Lieutenant Robert Karras of the Newburgh Heights Police agreed, and he told Unsolved Mysteries, quote, "It's our belief that his body was dumped out there, and whoever the person or persons were knew the area, and they knew that people go there and kids play there, so eventually, within a certain amount of time, he would be found." Unquote. Kurt was lying on his back in a crucifixion-like pose with one leg crossed over the other near the ankle, as if he had just laid down and gone to sleep. Or is that what someone wanted the police to think? Kurt was also found with no shoes on, and although his left shoe was found between some rocks nearby, his right shoe was never found, and they determined he'd only died 24 to 36 hours before being found, meaning that he had died somewhere between the 26th and the 27th, posing the question, where had he been for the 3 days before? Kurt had one bruise on his cheek, multiple bruises on his shins, and some abrasions on his skin, but there was no signs of any major trauma. He had not been shot, stabbed, or beaten to death. He hadn't been injected with anything, and alcohol poisoning was also ruled out, so the medical examiner was not able to pinpoint his exact cause of death. Chief Deputy Coroner Dr. Lester Adelson, who performed the autopsy, said, quote, "The manner of death in this particular case was signed out as probably accidental. He hadn't been beaten in any way. He hadn't been traumatized in any way. He didn't have enough alcohol to end his life. He had no pre-existing natural disease. And as Sherlock Holmes said, you eliminate all other possibilities, and that which remains is the truth. It was a diagnosis by exclusion." Unquote.
We don't know why Kurt didn't return home on the 23rd of October, or even in the few days between the party and his death, but there was a sighting of him on the 26th. One of his friends from school, David Trusnick, saw him from his car on a busy street near the Sova home. He told Unsolved Mysteries, quote, "I pulled over to offer Kurt a ride at this point, and a van pulled up and Kurt yelled out Franco. They both ran over to the van and they got in. I didn't know Kurt was missing. If I would have known he was missing, there would probably have been something I could have done. I could have followed the van, but I didn't know. And 2 days later, he was found dead, and that was the last time I saw him." Unquote. I don't know if this sighting was confirmed by police as being Kurt, but it seems to be pretty reliable in my opinion. Many have speculated that the Franco that Kurt was heard talking to was in fact Craig H. Franco, an 18-year-old boy who was shot and killed just 5 weeks after Kurt died. According to the Akron Beacon Journal, Craig was shot and killed while he was working at a petrol station downtown. I couldn't find any more information on this case, and while a commenter on the Unsolved Mysteries forum claims that his killers were convicted in 1986, I was unable to confirm this. It is also worth noting that we don't even know if this case is connected or that Craig Franco is in fact the same Franco that Kurt was seen with. On the same day that the sighting took place, an unknown male was seen near the Sova's residence. When he saw Kurt's missing persons poster in a shop window, he entered the shop and told the manager to take it down because Kurt would be found dead in 2 days anyway. The next day, when the manager arrived to open the shop, she found a bouquet of flowers sitting outside, along with a note that read, quote, "Roses are red, the sky is blue. They found him dead and they'll find you too," unquote. The man was tracked down, and while he appeared to be mentally unstable, he was released as he hadn't committed a crime, and there was no evidence to directly connect him to Kurt's case. The next lead in the case came from Angeline Reddix, who lived near Harvard Avenue, where the party was held. She told Ken and Dorothy that around the time Kurt died, she looked out her bedroom window and saw 2 men dragging the body of an unconscious teen boy to the ravine. Quote, "I seen them taking a boy down the alley. It was just before Halloween. One foot was barefoot. I'm almost sure it was the right one. I figured, couple teenagers with a couple beers too many, and they're probably trying to sober up," end quote. Ken and Dorothy urged her to tell the police, but she was reluctant, as she was scared of the possible repercussions. She didn't tell the police about this until 1989, 8 years after Kurt had died, but they never contacted her for a follow-up.
The FBI, Newburgh Heights Police Department, the Cahoga Sheriff's Office, and the Cleveland Police have all looked into Kurt's case over the years, but the circumstances surrounding his death are still unknown and his case is unsolved. Kurt's case has baffled his friends, family, and true crime sleuthers for almost 40 years, and many theories have been debated in that time. Before we begin the next part of this episode, I want to state that all of these theories are pure speculation. So, Alexis, from everything that we've just spoke about, what are your initial thoughts on Kurt's case?
I don't know. It's a confusing case, and I went over a few theories in my mind last night based on the main theories that were looked at in the case, but I definitely don't think it was an accident, just because of the way the body was found and the time in between him going missing and his death.
But the thing that baffled me most about this case when I first looked into it was that he died several days after he was last seen, which, given that by all accounts Kurt was a good student and he wasn't one for getting into trouble, the behaviour that he displayed the day he went missing at that party by the excessive drinking and the going missing for several days really seems like it was out of character for him. So the main question I have, which I understand is a question that we'll probably never get the answer to, was there something going on in his life that we maybe don't know about? Was he struggling with something? Had he gotten into a bad crowd? What preceded this? Because I think if we knew what led up to Kurt's death, then I think that's where the bulk of the answers in this case lie.
Yeah, I think you're right with that. But I also think, I know his mother in Unsolved Mysteries and other interviews she's done, she said, well, he didn't drink. Teenagers don't normally tell their parents if they're drinking. So I think maybe she could have not known about that. But the fact that he did skip school and then he didn't return home kind of adds to that. But that also makes me think maybe he wasn't returning home not of his own choice, if that makes sense. Like somebody was not letting him return home.
That's a real possibility that it wasn't voluntary, him not going home. Back to what you said about underage drinking, absolutely. A lot of kids obviously wouldn't tell their parents if they were doing stuff like that. But also, you don't go from not drinking or drinking very little to drinking Everclear. I had never heard of Everclear before I started researching this case because, well, it's not available in shops in the UK. I don't even know of a equivalent. I think the strongest alcohol I've heard of that we sell is absinthe.
Okay.
So I think going from not drinking very much to drinking Everclear is a really big jump. So again, was this maybe a crowd that he had been in for a while and no one knew about it? Again, that kind of seems unlikely in my head, because how many 17-year-old boys could kind of lead, I don't want to use the phrase like double life, but you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Could keep that much of their life secret. But then going back to what you said about it not being voluntary, he was seen in public by one of his schoolmates, and he did seem to know the person. He shouted Franco, so he did seem to know them. So every time that you think, oh, that might be a possibility, there seems to be something that kind of counteracts that. Craig Franco's death, it seems very coincidental to have happened so close to Kurt's case, and it might absolutely be a coincidence. What do you think about that, Alexis? Do you have any thoughts on Craig Franco's death, if it's connected, if it's just a total coincidence? What were your thoughts when you heard about that?
I actually didn't hear about that until we started recording and you said that. I had heard about it connecting to the Eugene case that I'm sure we'll talk about, but I hadn't heard about the Franco death. But just like the first time I'm hearing of it, it does seem interesting that the witness heard Kurt, or who they assumed was Kurt, yelling to Franco, and then what was it, like 5 days later he got shot?
It was 5 weeks.
Oh, 5 weeks. Okay.
5 weeks after Kurt died, he was shot. And the bit about Craig Franco isn't spoken about a lot in articles with this case. I found out more about that theory through Reddit posts and stuff, so I looked into it further, and that's where I found news clippings and Craig Franco's obituary. So that's how I've sort of, just to verify what the person on Reddit had said, that's when I kind of went researching, and I just thought it was a super interesting part of this case. Like, it does seem really coincidental, and they were the same age as well. Like, I don't know how big this town was that Kurt lived in, but it's very possible that they at least knew each other. The person on Reddit that I saw talking about this possibility said that Craig Franco's killer was found in 1986, but that part I wasn't actually able to verify. I couldn't find any information stating that his killers had been arrested, or even a person of interest. His murder has got very, very little media coverage. And when I say very little, like, it's tiny, from what I was able to find, tiny little newspaper articles saying that he was shot, I believe it was while he was working at like a petrol station or like a gas station. So I don't know if they just assumed it was a robbery. Like, I don't know, because there's been very little about that case that's been covered. It's kind of hard to link them together, other than they were two boys who might have known each other and whose deaths might have been connected. Apart from it being totally coincidental and circumstantial, it is quite a loose connection, but still one that I thought warrants being mentioned.
I think that you said you don't know like how big the town they lived in was, but I think that would really tell us if it was connected or not, because if the town was fairly small and like they didn't have a lot of murders happening in that town, then it's more likely to be connected than if it was like Columbus, Ohio or something that's a huge town.
Okay, so I've just looked up. Cleveland, Ohio has got a population of around 385,000. And from what I can see on Google Maps, Newburgh Heights seems to be quite small. Within that, just from looking at it on a map, there's a park, there's a golf course, but it doesn't really seem like there's a lot of streets in it. So it does seem like quite a small suburb in my opinion. So that kind of maybe gives more weight to the argument that they were maybe connected. But again, because there's so little known about Craig Franco's death, it's really quite hard to say for sure. So there are a lot of people that believe his death was an accident, that he maybe died of exposure or complications through alcohol poisoning. I don't know how much I really believe that that's the case, because I'm pretty sure that that would be something the medical examiner would be able to, to not diagnose, but they would be able to determine if that was the cause of death, especially the alcohol poisoning, because I'd imagine that given the circumstances of his disappearance, they'd be looking for that. And his alcohol level would have came up as part of a kind of a tox screen or like a standard blood test anyway. What do you think, Alexis?
I definitely don't think it was an accident because of the reasons you said and because of the timeline of when he went missing to when he was found dead. And then when he was found dead, they estimated maybe 48 hours at most that he had been deceased. So that just doesn't seem to add up with the timeline of alcohol poisoning or exposure.
Absolutely. And I think the theory that he died through alcohol poisoning would maybe make more sense if he had died the night that he disappeared or the day after, but maybe not 5 days later,
Mm-hmm.
because unless you believe that just for 5 days or 4 days, he went on this massive bender where he just sort of like let loose for a certain amount of time and drank loads and it eventually took his life, or maybe he was drunk and passed out where he was found near that ravine and then died of exposure. But again, his dad was searching there right before he was found and didn't see anything. And he was wearing that really bright yellow top. So you'd think if he was there, he would have found him. I can't see how he wouldn't have found him if he was searching near that ravine.
Yeah, me neither. And just the way Kurt's body was found, it kind of seemed staged to me.
Absolutely. The position he was in. I think the fact that his right shoe was missing
Mm-hmm.
seems really, really bizarre. And one thing I've always wondered when I was kind of researching this case is if his socks were dirty or not. Because if his socks were clean, that to me indicates that he did not walk to the place that he was found. He didn't walk there. He didn't just die of exposure or
Mm-hmm.
of drugs or whatever. If his socks were clean, that to me indicates he was carried and laid there,
Yeah, definitely.
to be found, which I think we don't know if his socks were dirty. That's never been publicly released. But I think that's where my kind of brain is when I'm thinking about this case, is that whether it was foul play or an accident, I absolutely believe there's something really, really dodgy and really, really sketchy about that party he was at. And the fact that Debbie Sams, who, by the way, in the Unsolved Mysteries episode, she is referred to as Susan for her own anonymity. She's since came forward and kind of said what her name is. So if you're looking up this case, anyone who's interested in this case and Googles it, there's Debbie Sams and Susan are the same person, just to avoid confusion. The fact that she lied about the party and says, no, 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 he's never been here before, when that seems like a very silly thing to lie about, given I don't know exactly how many people are at this party, but from the research I did, it seems, or at least I got the impression, that there was quite a lot of people there. So it seems like a really silly thing to lie about, since, it was really easy for the Sovas to say, no, there was a party. Was she maybe lying because she didn't want to get done for underage drinking? A 17-year-old's missing. Would you not have slightly more compassion for his parents to just admit, yes, he was there? Why wouldn't you want to help them
Yeah.
if you were innocent and if you hadn't done anything wrong? And as I said, this is all pure speculation. We don't know if she was involved in his death in any way, but it makes her, in my opinion, look really sketchy. The fact that she's changed her story so many times. Yes, there was a party. No, no, there wasn't. Yes, there was. He's in my basement. Oh no, wait, he's not in my basement.
Yeah, and just the fact that she stated, like, no, he wasn't at the party seems interesting to me because if it was a big party, it would make more sense for her to say, like, I don't know if he was here, but saying blatantly, no, he wasn't here kind of makes me think she knew something. She might not have been involved in anything, but she could have known something, like maybe Kurt was trying to stay away from his family or something along those lines.
Maybe. Another thing, I mean, if it is a big party, She easily could have said, I had a party, I didn't see him, but it doesn't mean he wasn't there.
Yeah.
Or I saw him briefly. Like, there was no need to totally lie and say there wasn't a party, I've never seen him, to then do a full 180 and say, oh wait, there was a party, and oh wait, he was there. Oops, sorry, I forgot that. I think his death was definitely covered up, without a doubt. I think there's way more people involved in this, and I don't know if it was out of fear of whatever, but then that adds another element. What were they scared of? Did they just panic if he had died accidentally? Did something worse happen to him? Like, was there foul play involved? There's so many parts of this, it just doesn't make sense to me, and there's so many unanswered questions.
Yeah. In the Unsolved Mysteries episode that went over the Kurt Sova case, the Susan, which is Debbie, she stated, like, there's somebody sleeping in my basement, like maybe it's Kurt. It kind of struck me as odd that she didn't know who was in her basement or if they were in fact in her basement.
If I found someone in a part of my house, or even if I thought there was someone in part of my house and I didn't know who they were or how they'd got there, my first reaction would be to phone the police.
Yeah.
And even if she did think it was Kurt, she still should have phoned the police instead of putting the Sova family through that. Can only imagine all the thoughts that were going through Ken and Dorothy's head as they were driving to that house. Fear and maybe hope that, oh my God, we might have found him. And for that just to be ripped away when they got there and saw nothing.
Yeah.
A theory that I bumped into when I was researching this was that perhaps if Kurt had died and Debbie and a few other people were there and were frightened, did Debbie possibly phone the Sovas to say that he's here? The other people panicked and then hit him? Do you know what I mean? And then moved his body before the Sovas got there. Is it possible that she maybe wanted to sort of hand themselves in and say, I'm sorry, this was an awful accident, or whatever, and the other people that were there were like, no, 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 we're covering this up before they get here, we're moving his body before we get here.
Yeah, well, Dorothy even said, I'm not sure if she said she believed it or it could have been possible, but when the whole thing came up of Kurt maybe being in the basement, she said maybe he was already dead and he was laying on that cot and then they moved him. And I thought that was really interesting for her to come out and suggest.
Absolutely, that's a possibility, but then, it's so confusing because
Yeah.
in one way, when you look into this case, there's a lot on the internet about it. A few different podcasts have covered it. There's news stories about it. CrimeCon did an event on it, which we'll get to a little bit later. There's a lot of interest around this case, but there's very little information.
Mm-hmm.
So there's so many holes in this case and so many unanswered questions for the amount of media coverage, or at least kind of coverage in the true crime community than it has, which is so, so frustrating. This case has baffled me for a long time. It's just so frustrating because there's so few answers. There's so few, well, I know there's a lot, there's not very many answers in unsolved cases. That's the whole point, that it's unsolved. But in this case in particular, there's so many gaps and, things we just don't know.
Yeah.
One thing that I put in my list of theories, which has been mentioned absolutely nowhere, but this is just kind of my thoughts, is if he died through solvent abuse. Now, I know that this is out there and there's absolutely nothing that would lead you to think this, but as part of my job, I actually recently did training on solvent abuse, so this is probably why this was in my head. But I've recently learned through this training that I did that if you die through inhaling solvents like glue or hairsprays and deodorants and all those sort of household things that can get you high. It's very easy to die from that. It's really, really lethal, and it's such a I think a lot of people think that was just a fad back in the 70s and 80s and 90s. It's just gone away, and it hasn't. It's just not as talked about now. But also, it's so underreported in terms of statistics, because the medical examiners don't look for evidence of solvent abuse in the soft tissues unless they're looking for it. So I said, because I just done training on this, that's maybe why it was in my head. But I think it's a possibility.
Yeah, that could definitely be a possibility. I still don't know a lot about that, but if it's hard to trace, that makes a lot of sense. And I know his toxicology was negative, but there are also a lot of drugs that you would have to do a specialized toxicology for. And if they weren't specifically searching for those drugs, they probably didn't do them.
Totally. And that might be part of the reason why maybe people who perhaps covered this up or moved his body, maybe they freaked out and panicked because, they didn't want to get in trouble, or, because you never know how you're going to respond to a situation like that, because we all would hope that we're never in that position, but they may have just panicked. So yeah, it was a theory that I saw absolutely nowhere, but I wanted to put forward anyway. The second theory is obviously foul play, but if he was murdered, I don't know how he would have been murdered and the medical examiner not see how he was murdered.
That's kind of what I was wondering, because I was thinking through not normal, but statistical ways that people are killed, and most of them are pretty easy to find. I did go over the Kendrick Johnson case once, which the medical examiner stated that his cause of death was blunt force trauma to the neck, even though there was only a few centimeter large bruise there. And that kind of came into my mind thinking about this theory. If it was just a tiny bruise, but somehow it was enough, blunt force trauma to kill him. But that just doesn't seem likely still.
I don't know. I can't think of a way that someone would have murdered him that it wouldn't be obvious. They would have to have been. They would have had to have been very inventive to think of a way. But even if he was murdered, I don't think it was planned. Nothing about this seems like it was thought out, that it was, apart from moving his body, him going missing at a party and then him being missing for 5 days, but only being dead 1 to 2 days before being found. None of that seems very thought out to me or calculated to me. Even in terms of suspects, I couldn't really find any online. I don't know if police maybe just know more than we do, or if they've got persons of interest that they've not spoken about. He seemed like a really good kid. I saw somewhere that there was maybe friction over a girl that I can't remember where I read this, but somewhere I'm sure it said that instead of him being sick and being asked to leave, that there was maybe a fight between him and someone else over a girl. But again, I can't remember where I read that. But that still doesn't make sense as to why he didn't return home. And if he was, say, kidnapped and it wasn't voluntary that he went home, you'd think that he'd have injuries. If someone had, say, kidnapped him from this party and had held him somewhere, he would have some sort of injury, typically, I would have thought.
Yeah.
There's so much about this, it doesn't make sense. But the third theory relates to the death of Eugene Cavett. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. He was a 13-year-old boy who was also found dead on the 1st of February 1982. He was found dead near a ravine just 2.5 miles away from where Kurt was found. only 4 months after Kurt had died. And there's very, very little on his case as well. But people think that their cases might be related because of the proximity and the times of which they died. Apparently, they were both missing for just a few days before they were found. Eugene's right shoe was also missing, which is a very interesting similarity, but I don't know what the significance of the right shoe would have been. You know, I don't think there's some sort of serial killer that is kidnapping teenage boys and keeping their right shoe. You know, like, some things, they're weird, but they are just a coincidence. There are very few details available about Eugene's death, and I don't even know if they're treating it as a homicide or how long he had been dead before he was found. You know, I don't know if they think he drowned in the ravine or what. So again, like Craig Franco's, very little information to go on. But Alexis, what do you think about Eugene's case and about the possibility that it's maybe connected to Kurt's?
I think it's pretty interesting just how similar they are. Like, they were both found in ravines, they were both missing for a few days. The right shoe was missing. And the first thing I thought of when I heard about the right shoe was obviously like, I can't think of the word now. The thing serial killers take from their victims.
Like trophies, like mementos.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Obviously, there's not a serial killer doing this, but that's the first thing that popped in my mind because that's just a weird coincidence, if it is a coincidence. But I feel like they almost have to be connected in some way, even if it was just like some sort of copycat, not murder, but maybe just a copycat laying the body out after Eugene was dead, because it was so similar to Kurt's body being found.
Possibly. I mean, it might have been someone that heard about Kurt's case and maybe drowned Eugene deliberately and knew about Kurt's case and thought, I'm going to make it look like it was linked to him.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people have said that they might be connected because Eugene and Kurt were close in age. Sources differ on Eugene's age. Some say he was 13, some say he was 15. From photos available of him online, I believe he was 13. He looks on the younger side, in my opinion. And while that is only a 4-year age gap, 4 years in adulthood doesn't seem very much, but I think the differences in the circles that a 13-year-old runs in and the circles that a 17-year-old runs in, you know, are very, very different. And obviously it doesn't mean that they're not connected, but I don't know. I definitely think that it's worth looking into, but without even knowing how the police are treating Eugene's case,
Mm-hmm.
it's really hard to kind of connect them together. I mean, at least with Craig Franco's case, we know he was murdered. We know he was shot. We don't even have that with Eugene's case at all. Kurt's family have never received closure over his death, and sadly, the only member of his immediate family who is still alive is his brother Kevin, who continues to seek answers in his case. He is not alone, as the police have reopened his case in 2019, and criminology students at the Tiffin University in Ohio are looking into his case as part of their degree. Furthermore, his death was the centre of a Crime Solve event at CrimeCon last year, where participants were given access to facts that had not previously been released to the public, in hopes that together they could come up with investigative leads and find justice for Kurt Sova. Over 300 people attended the Crime Solve event, including Selena Gomez and her mother, and they have all signed non-disclosure agreements, meaning that they cannot discuss sensitive details about the case with anyone who is not part of their private Facebook group. Kevin is happy that so many people feel passionate about Kurt's case, and he wrote in an article for CrimeCon's website, quote, "I told her so many times, Mum, give up. No one cares about this anymore. No one cares about Kurt. Now I know hundreds of people, complete strangers, have it in their heart to do something. It's the way to do these things in the future. These people are nothing but optimistic about their ability to help, and you can see it in their eyes that they want to help a total stranger's family. How do you not encourage that? When I get to see her again, I'm going to tell Mum, I was wrong, Mum. People still care. They've cared all along, unquote. And that's why I really wanted to join the true crime community, and why I'm so proud of all the online creators and online web sleuthers that have made this community what it is. People care and want every family to receive closure and for every victim to get justice. Crime Stoppers are currently offering a reward of up to $5,000 for any information leading to an arrest in Kurt Sova's case. You can contact them on 21625-CRIME. All photos and sources related to today's case can be found on our website, uncovertruecrimepodcast.co.uk. Thank you again, Alexis, for coming on this podcast and discussing Kurt Sova's case with me.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
You're welcome anytime. As I said, I will be over on the Great Unsolved podcast in hopefully not too long after this goes live. Alexis, do you want to say a few things about what we might be discussing on your episode?
Yeah, so we're going to be going over the case of Lavina Johnson, which is a case of a U.S. Army soldier that passed away in Iraq, sorry. And the things surrounding her death are very mysterious. The Army said it was suicide, but nothing really lines up with that theory.
It's a super interesting case, and the minute that Alexis said that it was one of the cases she was possibly considering for our collaboration, I immediately was like, yes, that's a case that I've researched and that I've been really quite passionate about for a while. So I'm really looking forward to going on to Alexis' podcast and discussing it more with her. So if it's already out by the time this episode goes up, it will be in the description or show notes of this episode. That's everything I have for you today. Thank you for listening till the very end. Please stay safe and have a good night.